Welcome to week 3. In week 3, we will be going over chapters 5 and 6 and just kind of an update on the course as a whole. I think we may have finally gotten the discussion board issues worked out. We are attempting to make smaller groups in the discussion boards to have better discussions and also to, we feel like, get better feedback because you'll get to kind of know each other. And so we have that initial post due on Wednesday so that gives you until Sunday to respond to your classmates. So I appreciate you working with us and being patient on that. Make sure you are posting your initial thread under your coach's name and then under the first letter of your last name. And most of you are, so thank you so much. Again, it helps our coaches in their grading if you're posting in the appropriate places for all of your postings, your initial and your feedback. This week, as I said, we'll go through chapters 5 and 6. Chapter 5 is on variable costing, and this is a managerial concept that is used in manufacturing. And what we do in variable costing is when we look at the product cost. Previously, when we talked about product cost, we said direct material, direct labor, and factory overhead, which is any product cost that is not direct. And so indirect materials, indirect labor, and then overhead in the factory such as utilities, supervisor salaries, etc. And this FOH, factory overhead, includes both fixed and variable components. And so what we do in variable costing is we pull those out. And so now we have direct material, we have direct labor, and we have variable factory overhead. We separate those out. And the reason we do that in managerial accounting, we still have fixed factory overhead, but the reason we, in variable costing, and this is used internally for a lot of organizations, and I say internally because it's not generally accepted accounting principles. Generally accepted accounting principles includes fixed overhead in the product cost. But what we're doing with variable costing is it's a managerial accounting concept that allows us to analyze changes to our bottom line, changes to our product cost based on volume. Because by definition, variable costs vary with production. Fixed costs do not. And so if you're trying to make decisions internally, variable costing is very important to you. In chapter 6, we start talking about activity-based costing. And in activity-based costing, we kind of go back to that predetermined overhead rate that we talked about in chapter 4. And in the predetermined overhead rate, what we're doing is allocating estimated overhead based on a driver. And oftentimes that'll be direct labor cost, direct labor hours, machine hours, whatever we have determined is driving up our overhead, that's what we're basing it on. So far what we've done is a plant-wide predetermined overhead rate. You can also do departmental, which means you have a overhead for each department and then you have a driver for each department. But in chapter 6 we get into activities, and this is the best way to allocate overhead. And the reason is because we are looking not at just one overhead rate, but at several based on activities. So it might be designing. It might be packaging. It might be, I don't have my book in front of me to look at all of them, but it can be whatever your activity is. It could be I'm trying to think like a car manufacturer. It could be like metal, and then it could be like leather. Whatever the activity is, that's the way we're going to allocate. And it is more complicated. You will have more than one predetermined overhead rate. You will have one for each activity, and you will assign it as such to the products. But you get a more accurate product cost. And so what we're going to do in chapter 6 is look at a comparison of what happens when we do one predetermined overhead rate plant-wide as opposed to taking that same amount of overhead and allocating it between the activities. Now keep in mind, if our plant-wide overhead is $200,000, when we split that up by activity, it's still $200,000. that's still $200,000 of overhead. We've just taken that total overhead and we've allocated it between the activities. And again, where we would have one driver, so say this was 10,000 hours, we're going to have different drivers. Designing might be hours. Packaging might be hours as well. Metal might be machine hours. Leather might be square footage used. It's whatever you are determining is driving up that cost. And so up here we have one predetermined overhead rate. So for every direct labor hour we assign $20 of overhead. But down here with activity-based costing, and again you're doing one or the other, you're not doing both, you have 4 different rates. And we're taking those rates times the actual, and that gives us our allocated overhead. So again, this is back to chapter 4. Now we're moving into activity-based costing, which again, as I said, it's a little more complicated, a little more time-consuming, but it is more accurate. We also have our midterm exam this week that will open on April 6th at 6 a.m. and close on April 7th at on April 8th at 6 a.m. You've got a 48-hour window to take that exam, and I will post more information about that this week. If you have any other questions, again, the discussion board is a good place to go. If you have questions about your homework, make sure you're watching the videos and then reach out to your coaches. So far, everything's going great. I'm super impressed with you guys and the feedback I'm getting, and I thank you for your patience as we work through this course.